All right, let's talk about ternary graphs. A ternary graph is a little bit different to ones that you normally would see. On a normal graph, you've probably got a vertical axis and a horizontal one, and you're just comparing two variables. On a ternary graph, we can see it's in the shape of a triangle, and that means it's got three sides or three axes. And that means that we're graphing probably an extra bit of information that we don't normally have to deal with. Some things to keep in mind about a ternary graph is that they do measure three variables, and they measure them as a percentage always, not as a total number. The mix, as we call it, of any of the three variables at any point totals 100%. So if I take point E, for example, I should be able to read a percentage of each of the three variables being measured and add them together, and they should equal 100%. So in a way, it kind of acts like a pie graph in the sense that we've got three different sectors that we're adding together and the total equals 100%. Reading a ternary graph is a little bit tricky at first, so I'll go through the basic steps that I use when I first encounter one. So I'll show you on this ternary graph my basic steps, and then we'll have a look at some practice questions. So at the moment I have a ternary graph in front of me, and if I look at the three sides, they've got arrows on them pointing in a clockwise direction, and the values as I move around in a clockwise direction also increase. You can get ternary graphs which the values increase in an anti-clockwise direction as well. The same method I'm about to show you can be applied on both types. There are other ways of reading one, and this one's takes a bit longer to do, but this one sort of ensures that you will get the right answer every time. Once you become more familiar with ternary graphs, you won't need to use this method because you'll be able to instantly look at it and be able to decipher it without doing all the mechanics that I'm about to do. So I'm just going to focus on one of the three axes first of all. I'm going to do each one on its own, and I'm going to look for the axis which has got 0 facing towards me and 100 pointing away from me. So at the moment, towards my tummy, I've got the base of the pyramid or the triangle, and the tertiary axis has got 0 and 100. All the numbers are towards me. So at the moment, I'm going to ignore the tertiary axes. So I'm left with primary and secondary. I can see on the secondary one, it's got 100 towards me and 0 pointing away. So again, I'm going to ignore secondary and tertiary. I'm just for the moment focusing on the primary scale. It's got 0 towards me, facing towards me, and 100 at the apex of this triangle, the top, pointing away from me. 0 towards and 100 away. When I've picked one side to read, I then need to figure out which lines am I going to be using to read that axis. So here's what I'm going to do. It's going to look a bit messy, but again, these are just the steps I take at the beginning. So the base of the pyramid, which is at my tummy, closest to me, that's going to become the 0 line for the primary axis. So I'm going to color code the arrow in red. Red for me is going to be primary, and if you can't see that very well, I'll put a big P. And every line which is parallel to that is going to be another 10% on the primary axis. And I'm going to highlight them now fairly quickly and hopefully not make a big mess of this. And I'm not doing a good job. So every line which I've just highlighted in red is another 10% on the primary axis. That's the one with 0 towards me and 100 pointing away. 0 and 100. So if I was going to say, look at point E, this one here, what I would say to myself is, what two values does it sit between? So I'm remembering I'm ignoring the tertiary and secondary axes at the moment because they're not 0 towards me and 100 away. So point E, if I go back over with my finger, I might trace over to the primary axes, it sits between 10% and 20%. So I know it's in the teens. Then I ask myself, well, is it closer to the 10% line, halfway, or closer to the 20% line? And I start to narrow down my thinking to estimate its value. So to me, and I'm just going to write P for primary, for point E, is about, it's just a little bit greater than halfway. I'll say it's either 16 or 17%. I'll go with 16 for the moment. So for point E, that's all I'm focused on at the moment. I can very clearly read one scale at a time with focusing on the one that's got 0 towards me and 100 pointing away. So we know it's called a ternary graph, right? Ternary graph. Well, I like to think in my mind that it's spelt this way, ternary, even though it's not really spelt that way, because I think there's a clue in its name. When you're starting out, you might want to turn the graph to read each side as clearly as possible. I'll show you what I mean. So I've just read the primary axes and got the data for point E, 16%. I'm now going to turn the graph once. So now I've got to figure out which of the three axes has got 0 pointing towards me and 100 pointing away from me. It's not going to be the primary axis because all of its numbers are pointing towards me at my tummy. It's not going to be the tertiary axis over here because it's got 100 towards me and 0 pointing away. So I'm going to look at the secondary axes this time, 0 towards my tummy and 100 pointing away. So what I'm going to do is the base of the triangle at my tummy is my 0 line on that scale, and I'm going to colour every line parallel to that blue colour. So the idea of the colour coding is that as we're just learning about how to read these graphs, we can just focus on one colour at a time and try and ignore the others. Look, I apologise if you're colourblind and watching this and thinking these look the same. These are just the colours I had on hand at the point. So the blue lines match up with the secondary axes. Remembering the base of the pyramid or triangle at my tummy is 0. So I'm still looking at point E, this dot here. And all I need to do is say what two values on the secondary axes does E sit between. By the way, a common mistake people make is that they say, well, E's here, I'll just read off this axis here. And that's going to be the wrong one because it's tertiary and it's increasing towards me. So it sits between the 40% and the 50% lines. There's 40, there's 50, and I'll just colour code that. So to me, it sits between 40 and 50. Again, it's just a little bit above halfway between 40 and 50. So I might say it's about 46%. So here we go. Secondary equals 46%. I hope you can read that. The last one I'm going to do, so again, I've turned it once, I'm going to turn it a third time. Glad I'm going slow, I don't want anyone to get dizzy from all this turning. So I now have my third side or third axis of the pyramid. It should be tertiary, let's just double check. Has it got 0 towards me and 100 pointing away from me at the top of the pyramid? Yes. So the base of the pyramid or triangle at my tummy is my 0 line. For that scale, I'll colour code the scale, tertiary. I've got 10, 20, 30, so I'm going to colour code those lines which are parallel to the baseline. So I'm focusing on point E. You might already think ahead while I'm drawing this. What value would we give to point E based on the tertiary axes? So on this tertiary axis, to me, it looks like it sits between 30% and 40%. And it's very close to 40%. It is definitely more than halfway. It's almost on the 40 line. So I might give it a value of about 38%. So let's go back up here. Tertiary, we've said 38%. So I've got three values, 16, 46, and 38. To To test if these percentages are correct, or at least sound correct, what I'm going to do is add them together and see if they total to up to 100. So I've got 6 plus 6 is 12, so I'll put a 1 in that column, and I've got to add 2 with the 8, so that makes another one, so I've got 0, and then I've just got to add the tens column. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 tens, so we've got 100% as a total. So that worked out fairly well. If it turns out that when you totaled the three numbers, that you got 101, 102, 99, 98, that just means that you might have been a percentage point off when guessing these values. So it's not really a concern. That's how I go about reading a ternary graph when I'm first learning. It involves color coding just in the first instance when I'm getting used to reading one axis at a time, and you turn it to do each one individually. When you become really skilled at reading these, what you might do is not color code, not even turn, just have a look at a point and realize I've got to go that direction, and that direction to read my values. But if you're not up to that point, this method's perfectly okay. You don't even need to color it, particularly if you're in an exam situation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start afresh with a blank ternary graph, and I'm going to present you with some practice questions. Here's 3 of them. What is being measured on the ternary graph? Now this one doesn't have a title, so it's not a really effective ternary graph, but here we go. I've got primary, secondary and tertiary sectors, and if I see those as a geographer, this requires a bit of background knowledge, but the answer I'm going to give is that these are talking about sectors of the economy. And these are industry sectors. So you might have heard that people work in manufacturing, so that'd be a secondary sector type of employment. Question 2, what percentage of people in country D, I'm pretending these dots are countries, work in the secondary sector? Okay, so let's put our thinking hats on. How did we go about this in the practice go? I'm looking for the secondary sector, so I want to read this axis, secondary, and I want to be able to read it effectively. If I'm just starting out, I want to have 0 pointing towards me and 100 pointing away. So what I'm going to do, because at the moment 100's pointing towards me and 0 is pointing away, is I'm actually going to turn it. So now that I've got the secondary axis here, I've got 0 on it pointing towards me and 100 pointing away at the top of the pyramid. Now I'm going to do this without color coding the lines, but if the base of the triangle, which is all at my tummy, is 0, and I'm looking for country D, here's country D, this one's pretty straightforward, it's actually on the next parallel line. And if I move across to the scale, that says it's 10%. 10% of people work in the secondary sector in country D. Let's go back to question 3, and I'll just put this back up the original way. Question 3 is multiple choice. So we're looking for the most correct answer. Remember that the percentages here might be 1 or 2% off from what you estimate them to be, so we're looking for the most correct answer. What is the mix? And that's the name we give for all 3 percentages. What is the mix for country A? I'm going to highlight country A here. So there's country A. What we want to do is look for the primary, secondary and tertiary results and see which one most correctly aligns with our measurements. So as I've got it sitting here, the axis which I can read is primary because it's got 0 towards me and 100 pointing away. And I know that the base of the pyramid is 0%. So for me, according to the primary scale, it sits between 0 and 10%. Now, before I even estimate what value it is, I can see that option A says that primary for point A should be 70%. Well, I've just estimated it's between 0 and 10. So I'm going to cross out A straight away. I don't even need to measure all three sides at this point before I can start crossing out some of these. B has a value between 0 and 10, and C does not. It says 34. So I'm already going to cross out 2 of the options. I'm within a 50-50 chance of getting this right. D again has another option of between 0 and 10. So it's the primary sector has got to be worth 4%. Let's turn it one more time. I'll turn it this way this time and read tertiary. So I've got the tertiary axes with 0 towards me and 100 pointing away, 0 to 100. I'm reading point A, and to me, if I start off at 0, 10, 20, 30, point A is actually on that 30% line. So let's have a look. I've got option B, 4%. Secondary is 30%, but I wasn't reading the secondary scale, I was reading the tertiary scale. So to me, that looks incorrect. Here in option D, we've got 30%. So that was correct, and this is correct. If I want to triple check, I'll just turn it one more time and have a look at the secondary scale. I've now turned it a third time. I've got 0 towards me and 100 away on the secondary scale. I'm looking for point A, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. It's between 60 and 70, which is exactly what's on here. So my best answer would be D. That's it.